Please. Hello, Pranav. Sophia!
What?
Mute.
Okay, I'm sorry about Justin.
What is this meeting on again?
Pranav. It's fine, you're not teaching today.
But what is it on though?
I just have to suffer.
Wait, how are we supposed to figure out what it was on? Was it in an email or something? It is. I don't see it on GitHub though. What?
Alright, hello everyone. So we are moving on into class 6 of our Python tutorial. So, in this class today, we're going to be talking about if statements or decision making. And this is a huge part of Python. As as a programmer, uh, the computers need to be able to make decisions based upon the data that you give it, and if statements is probably the best way in order for you to analyze that data and allow the computer to make a decision on its own. So, we're going to talk about the uses of it. We're going to talk about how to actually use it yourself, and I guess that's going to be our topic for today. So, to start off, we need to think about how decision making works. So, we're going to look at how decision making in our daily lives works. So, there's many things that we need to make decisions about, and it can be small decisions like when do I want to make up, when do I want to wake up, what do I want to eat for breakfast, and many times there are some implicit conditions. So these conditions are kind of like the reason for why your decision would occur. So when you would eat lunch would essentially be the implicit condition would be whether or not you're hungry or not. And if you're hungry, then you would eat lunch. Same thing with, say, running. If you're tired, then you would stop running. Otherwise, you keep on running. And so most of our decisions in our lives have some sort of implicit conditions behind it. And it's important to analyze these implicit conditions because it's very important when you talk about if statements. Alright, so now that we've talked about kind of like the general layer of decision making, we're going to start going into slightly more specifics, start trying to get more, I guess, similar to what the programming language would be about. So decision making in math. So in math, decision making can go anywhere from divisibility all the way to like a prime and composite. So a lot of these decisions that we make in math, they can kind of be calculated out. So this can be by doing the math itself, plugging into the calculator, and we can kind of get our answer. Say whether or not a number is prime or composite. So now as to what math has to do with programming, well, computers simply just do a lot of math, except in binary. And what they do is they will make the same exact, their decision-making process will kind of be the same as you would if you were to do it in a math, I guess, environment. And so that's how we can kind of apply the basics. So essentially what needs to happen is first there needs to be a condition. And so that condition must be tested. And based off the test results, then you can make a decision or choose an option. So this is kind of the basis of decision making. This is important, so I'll let you guys look at this for a second. So now that you guys have had some time to look at it, we can move on. So decision making and programming. So this is kind of going to be a very overall, not non-specific decision making diagram, I guess. So pretty much every single decision will be decided through if statements. Now, what are if statements? So if you look if you look through the English definition of if, you can kind of see that it entails a question. So this question will be kind of questioning the condition, whether or not it is true or false. And if the condition proves to be true, then whatever is inside this if statement will occur. Now, if it returns false or anything but true, essentially, then it will go to the else, and it will do whatever you tell it to do if the condition is not met. So this is kind of like our introduction to if statements, and this is kind of how they would look. And this is basically the syntax as you see in Python. Alright, so conditions. So conditions is something that we learned about in operators. So we learned about like the relational, logical, identity, member of, all those operators. And we all learned that all of those return something called a Boolean value, which is either true or false. And here we have an example of it. So here we have the greater than operator. So if A is greater than B, then print A is bigger. However, if A is not greater than B, then print B is bigger or the same as A. So this is kind of our our application of these operators that we learned of. So all of these Boolean value operators, they can all be used in that kind of condition right here. And that condition, as long as it returns true or false, it can be used in an if statement. Alright, so this is kind of getting into the specifics of how an if statement works, so you guys can read over this really quick. Alright, so indentation. So indentation is kind of like formatting. Now, in many languages, indentation is not important. However, in Python, it is. And the reason for this is because there is no other way for the computer to know this is part of the code block unless it's indented correctly. In most languages, such as Java, there's brackets. And so where the bracket starts and ends defines where the code block is supposed to be applied. Now, it is very important when you write the if statement that everything you want after the if statement proves to be true is within the same indentation or one tab. So if you look on kind of like the upper left corner of your keyboard, you'll see the tab button. So this tab button will allow you to go, I don't know, a couple spaces to the right, and that will prove to be the indentation for the rest of your code inside this tiny code block. Now, you see that this print over here is not with the same indentation as these two. And so that means that there's this break over here. So this break means that this is no longer part of the code block. So it would start over here and it would end over here. So even if you had a print statement that was indented like here, it will not be part of it because the code block has already ended right here. So this is very important because again, this is something very unique to Python, and it is something that there needs to be you need to pay attention to this because it can be very easy to make a mistake on this front, and you'll be scratching your head for a while if you didn't know that you made this mistake. Now, for if statements, sometimes there can be more than one option. Say you want to eat something for lunch. You can have pizza, a sandwich, pasta, or macaroni. And all of these have different conditions that they need to be met. And you'll probably have some sort of order in which you would want to have them. Say you like pizza more than the sandwich. And so that would mean that you would put the pizza in this if statement over here, and you put like pasta or the sandwich into this statement over here. So essentially what this elif means is it means else if. Now this just means that there can be like a different requirement that is met or a different condition that is met. And as long as there's a different condition, that is met, then it can perform the elif. And for all of these three over here, there is a condition. And you need to pay attention and see that this else statement over here doesn't have a condition. Because essentially, whatever that these three, anything that doesn't fit these three conditions, it automatically gets passed on to the else, no matter what. Next, we're going to be talking about something known as nested if statements. So, nested if statements aren't some sort of new concept or anything. It's essentially just an if statement within an if statement. Now, what does this mean? It could mean, say, I want to eat a sandwich, but what do I want inside my sandwich? Do I want turkey or do I want ham? So that's kind of how a nested if statement would work. So say you meet the condition that you want to eat a sandwich, right? So that means that this if statement over here proves to be true, so we can ignore this else over here. And over here we have this if statement within this if statement. So we've already decided we want a sandwich, but this if statement will determine what you want inside that sandwich. So say this one is turkey and this one is ham. And based on the condition over here, then you can decide whether or not you want turkey or ham. So this is kind of how a nested if statement would work. So I know looking at this for the first time, it can look pretty daunting, pretty confusing. So I'll let you guys look at this for a second. Now have had some time to look at this. We're gonna go look into some examples and kind of just do some reinforcement learning. Alright, so this website is called Guru99. It's a very good website if you're trying to learn about if statements. And as you can see in the topics up above, right here we have if, else, else if, or elif, nested if, and switch cases. So this is very similar to what we have in our presentation. So, as you can see, the if statement is known as a conditional statement, as we learned, and basically Python will perform different computations based on the Boolean constraint that is given. So this again is going to look is how the basic Python if statement is going to be written, and this is an example in an actual IDE. So you'll notice that this looks kind of different compared to what we have, because what we have is kind of like the, I guess, standard IDE. There's nothing special about it, but there are other kind of platforms where you can write Python, and there's different special features. Like it will write simple parts of code for you. Say you forgot a colon, it will put that colon in for you, or it will underline it in red because it's like, it seems like you're missing a colon, even though you wrote this. And that's kind of why this picture looks different as to what your program would look like if you were to go into your Python IDE. Now, as for how this kind of if statement looks, so as you can see, there's just if over here. You have the condition. Be careful, it has to be in parentheses, and you have the colon here. and within the colon you're going to have whatever statement you want, whatever you want it to do. And as you can see, there's this print over here. This print is outside, so no matter what happens inside here, this print will always happen. So this is how the code would look in a notepad, so there's no formatting or anything. So you guys can look at this right here. So next we can see this over here. So what happens if this if condition is not met? So as we can see in this example over here, x was 2, y was 8, so x is less than y. Now over here, x is greater than y, so that means this if statement is no longer met. So instead, it won't give you like an error per se, because this is an older version of Python. As you can see, Python 11.1, or like 12, 13, something like that. Much more recent, essentially. So it won't give you an error, but instead it will tell you, it won't pass through the if statement, essentially. So, essentially, if this condition is not met, then nothing will happen inside this if statement. So if you were to have a lower or a later version of Python, then you'd get this error. Now, we get to the else statement. So else is essentially just else followed by a colon, and underneath it would be its the statement that you would want to happen. So essentially what happens in this else is in case the if does not carry out, then you would want it to go to else. And so else, just like its English definition, will do whatever, will perform that statement if anything, for anything that doesn't pass through the if statement, essentially. So as we can see with this written else statement, since x is greater than y, st is equal to x is greater than y. And we can see this return over here, x is greater than y. This is how the code will look in a notepad. Alright, so next we're going to talk about what happens if I want there to be more than just two possible outcomes. So we can see that this else condition doesn't in fact work, because if both values are 8, x is not greater than y, even though it prints x is greater than y, because this else statement can only comprehend whatever this if statement does not take. So that's how we get into elif, or else if. So in order to correct this error, we add one more kind of state, or one more condition that can be met, and this is if x is equal to y. So that means that if they are both 8, then it prints x is the same as y, rather than x is greater than y. So that's kind of the application of the elif statement. right? So you guys can kind of look at this over here. Next is going to be how to execute this conditional statement with as little code as possible, because in programming you never want to have a long program, because having a long program means that it will take much longer to cover all of the mistakes, edit any part of the code you don't like, even cutting down the code itself. It's essentially a waste of time if both adding to the code and making it longer, as well as making it well, like trying to edit it or trying to fix it, debug it. So there's this neat feature in Python where essentially you can just write multiple lines of code in one line. I would not recommend this, as it can be hard to read sometimes, but definitely make sure that you always write your code as concise as possible, because the more concise it is, the easier it is to debug. Alright, so finally we move on to the nested if statement. So as we talked about this before, the nested if statement is essentially just an if statement within an if statement. So this is kind of a great example of indentation as well. As we see, this if statement would correspond to both of these else ifs and this else over here, but there's only this if statement over here, as this if statement does not correspond with either of these else ifs or else. So we can kind of look at this example for a little. It's a little long, so I'll give you guys a little to look at it. Alright, so finally we have something known as a switch statement. Now, I know we did not go over this, as this is it's a little advanced, not too advanced though, so we can kind of go over it. So essentially what's happening in this over here is there are many cases. So rather than essentially doing the conditions, it will pre-assign the cases. So as we can see, when we define the switcher over here, we define case 0 as this is case 0, this is case 1, this is case 2. And it will return switcher dot get argument comma nothing, right? So this is actually something known as calling a method, so we're not going to get into detail with that, but essentially what's happening is it's calling this method to choose one of these three cases, and once it chooses one of these cases over here, then it will go ahead and return whatever is inside this case. So this is a great way if you have like a lot of cases and you don't want to keep on writing else if and pasting in the condition over and over again. Cases is a great way to just kind of do it very quickly. So you guys can look at this for a second. It's it can be a little confusing, so I'll let you guys look at this for a little. guys have looked at this, now we can kind of do some examples. So we're going to go on to an online Python IDE. Oops, online. We're going to go ahead and use this one. So if you guys ever want to use it, just search up online Python IDE and just go to the website repl.it. It is very good. I would highly recommend it if you wanted to, say, follow along or something. So, in an if statement, you're obviously going to have the if over here, right? And this IDE does that for me. So we're actually going to pre-write the else over here. So this kind of if and else without any conditions or anything. So we're going to find an integer, say n, and we're going to make n is equal to 0. So if n is greater than 10, then return, or print actually, n is a big number, right? And else could be n is small. Alright, so if we were to run this, then we would see n is small. And so this is kind of a simple case of it. Now, one of my first projects that I did as a programmer when I learned about if statements is I went ahead and I made a question database. Now, what is a question database? So essentially, there's a lot of these things like online quizzes, I guess. Say, there's definitely been like quizzes about, say, which Harry Potter house are you? And all of these quizzes, behind them, there is loads and loads of if statements behind it. Because that's the only way for you to keep track of your score. And this is kind of a combination of I/O, or input-output, and if statements. So essentially, behind the program, each time there's a new question, it would be printed, and you would say one of the options. It would probably list as a multiple choice, and you would press A, B, C, or D. And based on your response, for some of the more advanced ones, there's going to be kind of ranked responses, and where essentially there's the best response, and there's the second best, third best, and worst responses. And based on the response, it will give you either a harder or an easier question. And that is kind of how if statements can be used in any real life applications, how you might have seen an if statement in work, even though you might not have known that it was actually working like that. And so I kind of wrote my own. It was a 10-question quiz. I believe it was on basketball, and basketball history, I believe. And I found it fun, as it was kind of a good way for me to kind of test my new knowledge on if statements, as well as combining it with something that I loved watching. And that's kind of how I saw how I was able to kind of bring programming into my own real life experiences. And that quiz allowed me to kind of see how if statements really worked, because obviously as a quiz, say you were to print print the question here, right? And you'd give the answer, and within this answer, if you were to get it right, then you would write a question here, printing the second question, right? And you would write a nested if statement over here. Right? And so that's kind of how I was able to learn if statements, and it's probably one of the best ways you could possibly learn how to program is with experience. So what I suggest you guys do is, obviously there's going to be assignments on our page. Those are completely optional. I highly recommend you do it. And there's also many different small projects you can pick up. whether that be something like a questionnaire, or whether that be something like a fun project that you could do with your family. And it doesn't have to be anything big, but as long as you practice using your if statements, it is probably it's going to be a good way for you to kind of learn it. And so, kind of to wrap this class up, we're going to go to Coding Bat, and we're going to see. So we're going to log into Python. So you can see all of these kind of warm-ups over here. So now if you go ahead and you click onto Logic, right? So all of these Coding Bat kind of exercises, they all have topics assigned to them. So there's Logic 1 and there's Logic 2. So if you guys really want to, you guys can kind of go through that and do it yourselves. As you can see, there's going to be a lot of nested if statements. It's going to test your knowledge, and obviously it's going to take a little kind of to understand how the website works. So I'll kind of give you guys a brief explanation. So essentially, what you guys need to do is first you need to find the method, and so this is going to be standard for every single one of the things that you do. So as you can see, you have cigar party, and you have two parameters inside this method. So you're always going to need to put two parameters, and you can name these variables however you want them to, and you have to define it as cigar party, and you need to put the colon over here. So as you can see, you have this if statement, and the only variables that you have that you start out with kind of is going to be the two parameters that you have over here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to run it, and you can see that there's a lot of cases that it runs through. And this is great for debugging because these are kind of short bits of code, and these short bits of code can help you kind of make sure that you understand how the code works entirely. Now there's going to be obviously show hint, so this is going to show how they would want you to do it, and there's also their solution, right? So this is obviously a lot more kind of compact than mine was, as at the time I don't believe I knew what and was, so I have a bunch of nested if statements rather than just using and. So that's going to be all for our class today. Thank you everyone for watching, and please put any questions into the chat right now, and I'll see if I can answer them. Alright, well, looks like that's all for this class, so thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you on Tuesday.